Violence mustn't dictate everything you do, and so you need displacement or distance. Reverse logic is often called for. Critical learning, for instance, must be offered especially to the privileged and not just the poor. And I'm not saying that these pronouncements are the agenda of Estudios, but it's just one of many that I came across listening in on their conversations. Inspired by this Estudio, we would like to position learning as a form of reoccupation, both cognitive and spatial, in precarious political and physical circumstances. The program is, of course, set against Mexico's extraordinarily rich history of experiments in education on the one hand, and the often violently contested place of learning in today's societies on the other. We will analyze the production and mediation of knowledge in paradoxical situations, in conditions that are not supposed to exist. The temporary Palestinian refugee camps, for instance, that are cities that are over 60 years old, or the state of emergency currently engulfing the Mexican educational system, despite its illustrious and deeply influential history. And we will consider how such a position of outsiderness or temporary displacement or distance might at times be the tool by which we can gain a deeper understanding of our current moment, the lens through which to examine learning as a process of identity creation precisely in and through these situations of exception. Part of our discussion will look at strategies that support a poetics of civic life that escapes the overwhelming structures of victimization and marginalization resulting from state repression. Recognizing the urgency of the topic, education and justice, I am honored that we have actually 3 keynote speakers today that help us illuminate this topic, interspersed with a poem and a panel discussion. And so it is now my great pleasure to introduce Sandi Hilal and Alessandro Petti, whose work is of seminal importance in this field and has been seen in many different places, countries and institutions, but I don't think in Mexico yet, or rarely so at the very least. Sandi Hilal and Alessandro Petti are both architects and researchers in urbanism, members of Decolonizing Architecture Art Residency, also known as DAR, in Beit Sahur, Palestine. DAR is an architectural office and an artistic residency program that combines conceptual speculation and architectural interventions. DAR was awarded several prizes, among them the Prince Claus Prize for Architecture, the Foundation for Arts Initiative Grant, and it was shortlisted for the Yakov Chernikov Prize and presented at numerous biennials, museums, and in various other contexts. Along research and practice, Hilal and Petti are engaged in critical pedagogy. They are founding members of Campus and Camps, a self-organized educational program in the Daesh refugee camp Bethlehem that enables communities of Palestinian refugees to produce new forms of representation of the camps and of themselves, overcoming the customary symbols of victimization, passivity, or poverty. Campus and Camps was at the heart of School Under a Tree, which had an earlier reincarnation at the Sao Paulo Biennial just this past fall. Stemming from their practice as architects, even in their pedagogical work, usually there is a very specific physical and even architectural and spatial element into the practice of Sandi and Alessandro. The two of them are the authors of numerous texts and publications, most recently with A.L. Weitzman of the book Architecture After Revolution, which was published in 2014, and is an invitation to rethink today's struggles for justice and equality, not only from the point of view of a historical perspective of revolution, but also from that of a continued struggle for decolonization. And I think we're going to hear more about that in a minute or in a few seconds. So please join me in welcoming Sandi and Alessandro, who are here.
Thank you for being here with us. I would also like to thank SITAC and Alumnos47 to permit us to be together with you here. And I actually would like to share with you one of the questions that was the driven question that bring us where we are today. You know, I born in Palestine, and I lived under colonialism all my life. And my question was how I can today be able still to live under colonialism, but by being active and not by being passive. And all this practice that we are doing, for me, is a sort of practice that is helping me, and this is why I am all the time in learning processes and looking for learning environment to understand better, is helping me to decolonize my mind. Because I realize through all this period of my life that what was the most difficult thing is that my mind is the one that is colonized, basically. And I have the freedom, if I want, because nobody is still controlling my mind, I have the freedom to decolonize my mind and to be together with others in the struggle of decolonizing mind. And this is what we are trying to do in Palestine with refugee camps through many sort of different devices that we will be speaking about in a few minutes. Well, I would like to begin by explaining a bit the story of the place where we are working. We are working in 5 refugee camps in the south of the West Bank. And actually, many of the things that you will be hearing is very much specifically to the camps in the West Bank. It's not, I mean, if you want to compare this with Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, maybe there are some differences. But I would like to begin the story from the 48. The war of the 48, then what we call as Palestinians Nakba, which means catastrophe, where Palestinians were forced to leave their homes and to get refuge somewhere else. And part of them got refuge in the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Gaza, and many other places. So when they got to these places, the first thing, of course, that was given to them was a tent. And you know, people refuge in this tent, but 3 years, 4 years, 5 years after, they began to have human necessities in order, you know, to be able to continue living. So the sort of, you know, automatic thing, that a natural thing that people began to do is to replace the tent of 4 walls. And when they arrived to the roof, the question was, and this is still very much an open question in the struggle of Palestine, should we or should we not build the roof of our houses? And here I want to bring a very important concept, which is the concept of normalization. And the refugees was very much all the time suspicious towards any sort of improvement and normalization of their own life, because they were so afraid that if they will put and build the roof, then all the international community, people around them will tell them, you are already settled, why do you need to come back home? So what is the meaning of struggling for a political right to return back home, because this is their political right, and in the same time, understanding how to live in dignity. What does it mean to still struggle for a political life while actually having the possibility to build your own home? But in the 50s, actually, the political answer to this question, if we build or we don't build the roof, was very much no. We don't build the roof. Refugee camps should look all the time as a very poor, marginalized places. They should look like refugee camps. This was the main political, actually, agenda around this. And this is why, up to today, if you go and visit refugee camps, refugees tend to show you only the misery, because the world so far has no tools to understand refugees beyond misery. to understand refugees beyond victimhood. And this is why Palestinian refugees felt that they have no means and tools to speak with the world if this is the only way refugees are represented. But in the same time, the camps where we are living are not only places of misery. We are working in a place called FINIC organization, and this organization is made of 6 floors, among them Edward Said Library, among them a gym for women, among them a wedding hall, and many other things, and a garden. But if you will go and ask refugees, why you are building all these cultural centers? Why do you have swimming pools in refugee camps? Why do you have houses made of, very nice houses made of stones? They would immediately feel accused, and their answer would be, I will destroy everything in order to come back home. And our main question that we try to answer since this last 7 years is that how we can bring the culture of exile into the discussion for a political right to return back home. And this is what we are trying so far to answer together with refugees.
So most likely when we talk about refugee camps, the image that you have in mind is something like that, which is a place made of tents, so very temporary kind of architecture, and a place that in fact it's just it's in its own setup is actually designed not to last. So it's very much a space of refuge and emergency from political conflicts. However, in the case of Palestinian refugee camps, the image of a camp is this one. This is an image of 1951, and this is an image of today. So what you have today is not anymore a space that is made of tents. You have something that maybe resonates, could look like a city, but it's not a city. Refugees themselves, they will ever refuse to call themselves citizen, of course, and particularly they will never call the camp a city. Despite its own materials are very similar to a city. So therefore, in what actually they differ? The first very basic difference has to do with the fact that the Palestinian community in exile, in refugee camps, it's a community that live today in which the concept of private property and public property doesn't make any sense. They exist only in a form of communality. Camps are spaces that are carved out from state sovereignty. They are not even territory of a state. The state doesn't operate in refugee camps. There are other organizations, like NGOs or UN agencies. But therefore, I mean, at the same time, refugees themselves, as Sandi explained, through several years, they had to deal with this incredible dilemma, which is how not to settle down, how not to transform this space, which is a camp, in a city, how not to undermine their right of return. So in one way there was a political discourse, but in the other way there was a transformational space that leads to a completely different political struggle. And this is very much, I think, at the center of our investigation, was trying to understand, first of all, disconnect the main political rhetoric from what the refugees themselves were actually operating in the everyday, which was the fact how to live in dignity at the same time reaffirming your right of return. How to be a refugee, which is not just a marginalized, poor, and depoliticized subject, but how to be a refugee that is constantly put into question the very existence of the state, the very existence of the political power. Therefore, when you enter in a camp today, you are overwhelmed by a space that in fact you cannot fully understand. Before I said, for example, there is no idea of private property, and despite the fact that you have houses, the refugees themselves, legally, they cannot own these houses because the very land that they're actually occupying temporarily is not theirs. Therefore, how they can own something that is standing on a space that actually is not theirs, and it's operated and in which the services are operated by UN agencies. So what brought us to refugee camps was this incredible interest in understanding what is this space, what is a refugee camp today after 65 years, and how politics operates inside these spaces. This is where the best thing for us to think through that, it was to have a space that allowed this discourse actually to be public and to be open. Because one of the problems is that at one level, as I said, there is a sort of official narration of how the refugees will present themselves and the camps. At the same time, there is, I would say, sort of underground discussion, or even a practice in this case, that is completely different. And this, maybe I will just try to explain this difference by a story. A story that Sadi Hanafi, a Palestinian sociologist, told us. He went back to visit his father in Yarmouk camp in Syria, and they were discussing, in the usual Palestinian humor, when they will go back, and dreaming, about this idea. So when we will go back to Haifa, we will lie on the beach, And therefore, the father is like 80 years old, was saying, I'm not sure actually I can very much, going back. What I'm going to do there, I built my life here. Damascus is a great place for me. I definitely, of course, want my rights to be recognized and the justice to be recognized by the international community. But, I think I'm okay here. I lived all my life in this space. Suddenly, a journalist entered into their house and make the same question. And the answer in this case was, I will go back tomorrow. And this is the same person that, in a way, to someone that comes from outside, will say, we want our right to be recognized. And the only way so far has been that you go back to the place where you have been expelled, and to the place of your own house. That could be a house in Haifa, in Akka, in Jaffa, in what is today Israel. So, in one way, this strategy was politically very important for many years, because the Palestinian right of return, despite many attempts by many states to forget about this or not to recognize it, even though it's an international right that is recognized and inscribed in many UN resolutions that actually allowed state to exist, therefore allowed also this right of return actually to be implemented. But narrowed down to a very specific articulation of this, which is the return to a private house. So you have the right of return only if you could demonstrate that you have a piece of paper that says that you had a house there. So it's the return to private property. And this was one of the very important concepts that also we tried to challenge as a discussion when we started Campus in Camps, as a space of learning, as a space in which some critical ideas could emerge without being necessarily slave of demonstrating to international community certain things without even having the pretensions to say we have to teach them what they still don't understand. In that sense was also an idea of having a space of autonomy to reflect without being dictated by an agenda from outside. So what we started to articulate, first of all, it was that in the very idea of the right of return, what is crucial is not actually the private property, which is of course something that many lost. But what was lost was an entire country with all, of course, its public dimension, entire cities. What was lost was also the sea. So all this discussion, we started to introduce and to articulate different ways to even to reconceptualize, in this case, the right of return. This has been only, let's say, one of the several investigations and discussions that we started to somehow to have in camps that lead us to a work that then has been named as a collective dictionary, which was essentially for us to reconceptualize terms that would make sense for the group and for the life in the camp. So there were certain words that, especially for refugees, had total different connotations. So they were not understood in the same way. And this was a very liberatory dimension, because this led completely to rebuild an existence around the fact that they are not anymore the victim. They were not actually the marginalized, but they were people that built a culture in exile. And this culture in exile has its own political dimension, which is very important always to remember when one could think about this right of return. So, and even in the Palestinian narration, the right of return was always erasing the life in exile. So the return was always to this very romanticized idea of going back to a village, to be a farmer. Sometimes we also, we play a little bit the game. So let's see if we are able to be farmer today. And they were totally unable, because all their life, of course, was an urban life. So we started very much to struggle, into trying to understand what is the gap between the political speech and the political practice, and how much we can actually build with inside a discourse that is much closer to the political dimension, the political practice of it. So the collective dictionary was very much a foundational moment for us, because it was a way to try to find, to define concepts that were very much relevant and fundamental, and allowed actually the possibility to understand each other. At the same time, we worked also in several initiatives. I don't think here we have a lot of time to think about, to talk about that, but very briefly, one of the projects that is being built in these days is actually a concrete tent in a garden of the Fenique, where actually the university is located. And the idea of this concrete tent is exactly to show this paradox between an object that is at the same time in a way to communicate its temporality, but by being made of concrete, is also something that shows this inertia and impossibility of being temporary. Another project which is in Fawar refugee camp, which is in the south of Hebron. I think Sandi will talk about that.
So, years ago, around 7 years ago, and I have to say I worked for the last 7 years as a head of a department called Camp Improvement Program in the UN. And I was very much trying to understand how we can work through institutions. So what does that mean? And through my work with the UN, one of the first projects that I tried to do with refugees, and actually the department I was heading was called Camp Improvement Program. And I spent the first 2 years of my heading this department understanding together with refugees what is the meaning of the word improvement. And here I have to say that being in places where there are a lot of informal settlements, is that, you know, the whole idea of improvement only as a very good thing that is being done to the community needs to be questioned very strongly. And this is what Palestinian refugees, because of their political status, is questioning all the time. What is the meaning of improvement for us and for our communities today? And let's not be naive and only think that improvement is bringing for us only good things. And what is the purpose behind this improvement? So I accepted the challenge of heading a department called Camp Improvement Program, and I was trying to understand together with refugees, what do we mean by improvement? So one of the first things that come out of the camp is that we would like, and especially coming out of women and kids, we would like to have space inside the camp where our kids could play. Because normally whenever thinking about places for the camp, it's on the edges of the camps, and it end up to be for 14 years old men generation. Also, in that sense, women and kids says we would like to have something inside the camp, and maybe the first way that we call it was plaza. No, it's so. Of course, when we speak about building a plaza in a refugee camp, the first question, alerting question, was if the plaza would be the last act of normalization in a refugee camp. You know, we did build the roof, and now we are even building the plaza. So we had to answer this question, no, by practice. And my question to them was, if the plaza is the last act of normalization and of staying in the camp, or it could be looked as the first place in order for this political right to be discussed, because refugees all the time refuged in their private property, because the private property is, and they call it shelter in the UN terms. What you are doing in refugee camps is to be sheltered. This is what is the maximum that you can get out of refugee camps. So my question was, are we only interested in being shelters, or this plaza will show that there are other ways in order to, being actively politically active in a refugee camp? But then when we passed this dilemma, or at least thought, yes, we want to enter into this together, the second question came, which is who will be managing this plaza? No, Alessandro mentioned before that, you know, there is no private and there is no public in the camp, and there is no public that could manage this plaza. So who will be managing the plaza? And the answer of the community was, we should do a closed plaza. You know, as an architect, by definition, a closed plaza is a very difficult thing to understand. What do we mean by closed plaza? Is there something similar that we could really speak about? And you would see the community immediately sort of designing the walls that should come out of each of this, on the borders of this plaza. And they would try to explain to me that the purpose of these walls are that each private individual and member of this community should enter through a door to this plaza. And why this was a very important action? Because by entering into the plaza, you take the responsibility in front of the whole community of whatever will be happening inside this place. So it was a way for them to sort of regulate the life of this plaza through the responsibility of actually entering into this. And these doors and these walls were for them completely crucial in that sense. So and I sort of was in the process as architect to understand what is happening, and strangely enough, I didn't get it until I saw the plaza built inside the camp, and I realized that this was the roofless home we were speaking about. No, the refugees all the time was speaking about them being roofless. So how can we represent this being roofless in a physical manifestation? But then actually this project was part of also the initiatives of Campus in Camps, because two members of Campus in Camps are two ladies, two refugees, women that comes from Fawar refugee camp. And Fawar refugee camp is a very conservative camp. And you know, my first meetings with the people was when we spoke about the plaza. The women in particular wanted very much to build a room in this plaza in order for them to be able to gather there. And actually, I believe in challenging and in your position. And as an architect, I immediately actually was against this idea of building a room. I was okay with it was a whole negotiation thing. So I was okay with the walls, but not okay with the room. And while I was sitting with them, especially women, discussing the whole idea of the plaza, they were telling me that, you know, their husbands will never let them go out to drink coffee and tea in this plaza. While strangely enough, we were drinking coffee together in this plaza. So I was just like, why you are here drinking coffee with me if you think you cannot do it by yourself? So years later, actually, two of the participants of Campus in Camps are still working on the right of the women to be in the public. And you know, I was only 1 month ago, I went to Fawar at 6 in the morning because I was doing gymnastic with the women, and then we had breakfast together in the plaza. So it's slowly, and now, you know, the fact that all the time we managed to do sort of planned activity that's so far managed, but now we are into this question, how we will be doing an unplanned activities. And one of the things that is really working very nicely is that 2 days a week, all the women in the camp knows that Ayat and Nida, the two girls that are working in Campus in Camps, are there with their coffee glasses and sitting and only chatting and having. So this is a way for us actually to think how we can combine theory and practice, in which way on the ground it's possible to combine these two things together. And yeah, that's it.
So every time we somehow try to build learning environments, situations which each one could participate and share knowledge. And one thing by the time that we realize that most of the time we are not only meeting in the Heysha, sometimes we, as a group, we go and visit several villages and places. This is one picture when we visit Batir, which is a village in the south of Jerusalem, in which they count a week having 8 days and not 7. And this is because there are 8 families that are using the water 1 day each family. So for them, time works in a completely different way. It has to do with how they share water. So, and every time, in a way or another, there was always constantly this presence of a tree that was offering shade and the minimum architecture to allow such a discussion. And after 3 years also, we felt very much the need to start to share this experience in other parts of the world, and especially for us, Latin American context was absolutely the place that was the most interesting one to try to build a relation. And therefore, the tree, as an idea of a tree school, became a sort of very simple device that to allow a sort of exchange of knowledge and production of knowledge, exchange of ideas and urgencies that are not already planned or structured by institution. So when they invited us into producing a work in São Paulo Biennale some months ago, we didn't want very much just to bring there a project and have an exhibition. So for us was very much using this art events to continue what we started in Palestine. And for us was a way to get out from a very specific situations and trying to understand what kind of alliance we can actually build in doing that. And therefore we collaborate with the art collective that is called Contrafile in São Paulo. And specifically we work with the community of today of the Quilombolas. This also was very important for us to understand if there are other situations in the world in which you have spaces that have form of life that in a way are not necessarily linked on the liberal idea of being a citizen. And of course the movement of the quilombolas in this day, especially in Bahia, where we spent almost 2 months, having similar discussion that we were having in camps, was a very important parallel for us, an understanding there were other historical trajectory that brought, in this case, historically the quilombolas were places established by slaves that managed to escape, and in the jungle where they're able actually to establish their own independent community. Some of them last for almost a century, but today what is interesting in Brazil is that this is now linked with a lot of other movements that in a way enlarge the possibility of understanding other form of life together. And also in this case, and there was especially one of the leader of the camp, start to tell us amazing story of the baobab tree. And the story and the legend of this tree was we were completely driven by it. Also, we have learned very much by this engagement with the community about many things, but essentially understanding the tree as a living element, as something that is there and is constantly transforming. And maybe in this I will just, we might not have time maybe to really talk about this project, but just I want to use this to lead to our studios, and these are just some of the images of the baobab tree brought into the ground floor of the São Paulo Biennale space, which people can enter without paying any tickets, and where several things were organized around this tree. So the baobab tree is also used as a sort of element around which several discussions and actions were taking place. So for the whole time of the exhibitions, around this small baobab tree that was brought inside, and of course the story is that in a way was suspended in this space, because all our discussion, it's always about this suspended space. And after the exhibition closed, the baobab tree was brought into one of the Quilombola community, and through a ritual was in a way rooted there, and especially for one of the leaders. This was an important element around which, again, organize a series of social and political activities. So for us, in this project specifically, we start to try out to understand if around always story of trees, and the tree also as a presence could always organize a sort of space for learning. And this is why also in occasion here, when we have been invited actually to present our work, we also said this is for us another incredible opportunity to actually not make a lecture like the one that we are having now, but actually trying to meet people that in a way are as interested in learning environments and how they can be created. What happened to my voice? Echoes. So, and especially, we came here knowing how rich was the experiment in Mexico, and especially around Cuernavaca, and we had these great times, great days with a fantastic group that maybe I would like to invite to join us, so that we can, that we started, at least what we started to experience. We couldn't put the light on so that we may change a little bit the setting. Can we have the light on, please? light, come si dice, lusos, por favor. Gracias. So, we spent a fantastic time with a group of people that in very different parts of Mexico, they are running absolutely interesting projects. And we wanted very much to have a place in which each one could actually be taken out and have a space to reflect and understand better collectively our own practice. So we started this discussions and trying, first of all, to understand what were some principles that could be shared in the group, and what were maybe the fundamental concepts that we'd like to discuss. So I would like to invite, in this case, Maurizio to start a little bit an impossible task, which is trying to describe a collective discussion that we had in a completely different environment than one that we have here. So we have this difficulty in actually changing our mode, but we'll try to do that and hope that something will be possible to communicate.
Teníamos esta tarea de hablar del árbol como lugar y tiempo de aprendizaje, hablar de educación, hablar de los distintos caminos, hablar de justicia, y tomamos un poco la idea de la ceiba, de camino, de educación, en el sentido de que, pues caminando, a final de cuentas, en las selvas uno se encuentra personas, ¿no?, que le dicen la importancia que tiene la ceiba, ¿no?, que la ceiba por un lado es canoa, por otro lado es alimento. Si uno se para a la orilla de sus raíces, donde está el fital de la copa, ahí en las raíces se forma alimento, que las semillas también son aceites, son luz, ¿no?, que también es medicina, que también es pues es fibra, es vestido, es cuerda, y todas las funciones que puede tener una ceiba, ¿no? Pero pasa el tiempo, uno sigue caminando y se encuentra personas distintas que le dicen que la ceiba es importante por otra cosa, ¿no? La ceiba echa un tallo cada año, 5 ramas, ¿no? Y si uno está viendo el tamaño del tallo, puede ver qué tanto llovió, ¿no? Si ve el grosor de las ramas, si ve su orientación, sabe cuáles fueron los vientos dominantes, cómo fueron, ¿no? Si da más frutos o menos frutos, anuncia la sequía o anuncia un tipo de lluvias, la forma en que florea, la forma en que crecen las raíces, habla de cómo fue, de cómo es el tiempo. Es algo que te anuncia, es algo que puedes leer. El tiempo se lee en la ceiba, tiene un lenguaje, pero puede pasar otro tiempo y uno se encuentra con otras personas y te hablan que la ceiba no es nada más importante por lo que es o por lo que anuncia o lo que puedes leer en ella, sino también es algo que integra. Tiene que ver con las abejas, tiene que ver con las avispas, tiene que ver con los murciélagos. Teje la selva a través de los tejones, a través de las serpientes, a través de los pájaros. Sembrarla después de una milpa en un lugar también habla de la forma en que se va a regenerar el territorio. El tejido existe también a través de la ceiba. Y pasa otro tiempo, caminas otro tiempo y te encuentras otras personas que te dicen que la ceiba no es solamente importante por lo que es, por lo que anuncia y se lee, por lo que teje, sino también es un lenguaje. Y es un lenguaje que nos permite hablar precisamente de esto que es común a todos, ¿no?, la selva en que vivimos, pero los árboles que son diferentes en cada quien. Y de eso es, en un sentido, lo que estábamos hablando, ¿no? Hay una violencia que nos hospeda a todos, pero que cada quien hospeda de manera diferente. Hay una justicia que nos hospeda a todos, pero que cada quien hospeda diferente. Una educación que nos hospeda a todos, pero que cada quien hospedamos de manera distinta.
Bueno, entonces justo lo que pasó fue eso, que convergieron un montón de miradas y de posturas muy distintas en torno a qué es el arte, qué es la justicia, y cómo es que estos dos términos pues los abordamos, los trabajamos, los rescatamos, y consideramos como grupo que sería importante compartirles un poco este marco de diversidad dentro del cual sucedió el diálogo. Y voy a presentar muy rápido los proyectos que estuvimos ahí y los activadores también. Entonces, bueno, estuvo Mauricio, que es de la Asociación Chacangular. Es un proyecto transdisciplinario que trabaja en Puebla, Veracruz, Chiapas, Yucatán y Quintana Roo. Y bueno, se dedican al trabajo en comunidades con altos índices de diversidad y fragmentación, y está enfocado a la restauración del territorio cultural, ambiental, económico y social. Está también Jessica, de Alumnos47, que es una organización que fomenta la generación e intercambio de conocimientos para explorar problemáticas actuales a través del arte contemporáneo. Y está Alberto, que colabora con un proyecto que se llama Zonas Liminales, Yolia, a través del Atelier Romo de Alumnos47. Trabajan con niños en situación de calle, proponiendo prácticas corporales y artísticas para el desarrollo comunitario y formativo a través de ejercicios integrales de educación artística. Bueno, no está Abigail, que es de Yolia, Niños de la Calle AC, que bueno, se dedican a trabajar igual con niños en situación de calle, que desde los 0 hasta los 17 años, y que junto con Alumnos47 está desarrollando este proyecto. Está también Claudia, de Zona Autónoma Temporal, que es un taller de gráfica comunitaria enfocado a adolescentes y jóvenes vecinos de Ocotepec, Morelos, que está vinculado con la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Morelos y con la asociación civil de esta institución, para estimular la difusión y experimentación de oficios vinculados a la gráfica tradicional y neográfica, con el objetivo de fomentar discursos disidentes a ejercicios de poder normalizadores. Está también, bueno, estuvo Gabriela, de Redes de Tutoría SC, que trabajan en el DF, Estado de México, Chiapas, Durango, Sinaloa, Guanajuato y Yucatán, y fomentan las relaciones horizontales entre el maestro y el alumno al compartir aprendizajes dentro y fuera del salón, bajo prácticas formativas no asistencialistas, con la firme convicción de que otra educación básica es posible. Está Carlos, de Unitierra, que es una organización, un espacio y una red de estudio, reflexión y acción, fundada en la concepción del aprendizaje como un aspecto de la vida cotidiana y en el reconocimiento de la importancia formativa del diálogo intercultural. Bueno, a lo mejor ya no digo dónde es cada quien, está en el mapa, en dónde trabajan. Estuvo Mónica, de la Curtiduría AC, que es un espacio a partir de prácticas y estrategias artísticas que retoma la forma de construcción social de las comunidades oaxaqueñas basadas en usos y costumbres. Una de ellas es la autogestión como forma de conciencia humana. Estuvo Garbiña, de Campamento Audiovisual Itinerante, que es un espacio de formación, encuentro, producción, exhibición y desarrollo de proyectos audiovisuales, realizado verano-verano en una comunidad distinta de Oaxaca durante 3 semanas, y entre sus principales objetivos se encuentran la formación de nuevos creadores audiovisuales desde su cultura e identidad y la creación de un espacio de diálogo entre el arte, el cine y la comunalidad. Y dentro del área de proyectos también estoy yo, Mayarí, de Manuales para la Enseñanza y el Aprendizaje de las Artes Visuales en Secundaria, que es un proyecto editorial artístico educativo de ocupación institucional, cuyos principales objetivos son la resignificación del espacio escolar y la estimulación de escenarios comunitarios de aprendizaje integral y desarrollo crítico a través de la divulgación e inclusión didáctico-pedagógica del arte contemporáneo mexicano y latinoamericano. Y además de estos proyectos, que implican como el trabajo de muchos más agentes, hubo 3 activadores, que son Ignacio, es uno de ellos. Él es etnólogo, teatrista y gestor cultural independiente. Está dedicado al desarrollo de proyectos interdisciplinarios enfocados en procesos de transformación social, trabajo con comunidades específicas y pedagogía crítica. Estuvo Daniel Morales y bueno, él pidió que se le presentara así, o la que hace. En general está en desacuerdo, pero está de acuerdo en dar clases en el Faro de Oriente, Central del Pueblo y Centro de Investigaciones Coreográficas, SICO, entre otros lugares. Ama las contradicciones y desde ellas pretende generar conocimiento. Y también estuvo Diego, es artista e investigador. Su práctica se basa en la producción poética en términos del lenguaje y las relaciones. Explora la intersección entre arte y curaduría mediante la construcción de situaciones que miran hacia las políticas de la representación y la producción de conocimiento en experiencias grupales. Entonces, como pueden ver, es muy variado, como los marcos desde los cuales trabaja cada uno. Sin embargo, a pesar de todas estas diferencias y de los múltiples puntos de encuentro y desencuentro que llegamos, sí pudimos ponernos de acuerdo en que hay una serie de urgencias que vale la pena y que merece atender y que nos ocupan a todos, hoy en día de forma individual y también a partir de ahora grupal. Entonces, Nato nos contará un poquito de ello.
Urgencias. Están en desorden, no tienen más que la suerte de, las voy a leer como me las entregaron y no voy a decir de quién las enunció, que fue parte del acuerdo, y básicamente dice así: elaborar en conjunto herramientas que nos permitan construir nuevos territorios de sentido de hoy y a largo plazo frente a la violencia, el despojo y el desasosiego. Compartir y propagar procesos de educación, construcción conjunta de conocimiento descolonizadores para transformar la realidad. Pensar, actuar, sentir, como construir un mundo donde quepan muchos mundos. Gracias. Mi urgencia es encontrar caminos para crear ambientes críticos de aprendizaje y espacios capaces de observar la conciencia profunda de la sociedad. No acostumbrarnos a vivir con violencia, no solamente la física y de las armas, sino también la violencia estructural. No conformarnos, dialogar, colaborar, escucharnos. Construirme como sujeto en oposición a toda forma de dominación. Construir educación libertaria, una vida justa y digna y una sociedad organizada. Reunificar nuestro hacer, pensar y sentir, poner a trabajar a las instituciones para la vida, recobrar la dignidad, observar nuestros automatismos, adueñarnos de la realidad. Libertad a Ricardo Lumbreras Tapia. Cómo llevar a cabo prácticas de observación para participar en la multiplicidad de relaciones sociales, semióticas, afectivas, políticas y económicas. Encontrar el punto honesto donde convergen necesidad e interés. Revertir las lógicas de dominación crítica y acrítica. Rescatar el espacio escolar. Subvertir las lógicas escolarizadas de dominación a través de la ocupación pedagógica del sistema educativo mexicano, de la configuración de estrategias formativas comunitarias y resignificación del espacio escolar fundadas en la integración de estrategias artístico-educativas que apelan al reconocimiento y al rescate, al intercambio y a la integración de saberes con la mira a generar nuevos saberes propicios al desarrollo comunitario autónomo. Urge refundar el país, un nuevo constituyente. Urge que aparezcan con vida los 42, más 11, más 70, más sigan contando. Y todos los desaparecidos, que se liberen a todos los presos políticos. Urge seguir contando 43 y exigir justicia. Diálogo y arte y cultura. Conociendo que tenemos voces distintas para dar sentido a lo que compartimos, considero urgente que el silencio sea territorio de aprendizaje. Perdón, me faltó una. Que el pueblo mande y el gobierno obedezca. Ampliar nuestra capacidad de aprender y hacer más allá de la educación. Sandi.
Yeah, when we were invited by Lucia and Carin, that I would love to thank them very much for understanding who we are. We told them, we are witnessing every day people coming to refugee camps only for for tourism, for sort of different types of tourism, and we don't want to be these people in Mexico. And in order not to be this in Mexico, we don't want to go and visit places. We would like to host Mexicans in their own houses and in their own country. And what we did is that we sort of, we were managed to, host and being hosted by Mexicans in the same time. And this created for us absolutely a very nice learning environment where we were all sort of playing the host and the hosted in the same moment. And I have to say that when we returned back yesterday afternoon, and when we came this morning to SITAC, to a place that is completely, unknown for us, completely mean nothing, I have to say, for us. When I saw all the group, I felt I have old friends in Mexico, which is so nice. So thank you very much. And now I'm ready to visit their places, and I'm ready, curious to know who they are. Thank you very much for having us here.
Me pidieron que también, que si alguien quiere preguntar o expresar alguna urgencia o lo que quieran compartir.
Mi nombre es Ana, yo soy brasileña.
¿Se puede ver luces? ¿Luces del público?
Bueno, yo soy de Brasil y yo aprecié muchísimo todo ese trabajo que presentaron acá y estoy también muy, muy feliz porque yo estoy con el libro brasileño de Paulo Freire, Pedagogía del Oprimido, y yo pude verificar la importancia de este libro que fue escrito por un brasileño en los años 70 para los días de hoy. Entonces, pude apreciar también, creo que hay mucho de esta inspiración en el trabajo que hicieron, de la pedagogía de la liberación, para la emancipación, la pedagogía para el oprimido. Yo estoy intentando hablar portuñol, ¿sabes, no? Entonces, disculpa, no es español. Pero entonces yo quería solamente registrar esta vinculación que yo encontré en todo este trabajo riquísimo de pedagogía, de educación, de construcción, de cultura y de también innovación de esperanzas, renovación de esperanzas. Gracias.
Muy brevemente, yo estuve ahí, entonces es una pregunta leading question. Me gustaría que hablaran un poco sobre cómo es que llegaron, qué realmente sucedió, si fue posible crear acuerdos, si no fue posible crear acuerdos, cuál fue realmente el proceso interno, porque creo que cada uno de ustedes representa prácticas educativas de pedagogía crítica muy avanzadas, por eso estaban ahí. Pero, sin embargo, una vez ahí, no estoy sugiriendo que fue una situación de crisis de ninguna especie, pero que la estructura del acuerdo fue un poco elusiva para nosotros, por un lado. Y, segundo lugar, ¿por qué definieron que esta era la manera de presentarse aquí? Lo siento.
Por la parte de tu primera pregunta, sí, creo que venimos de casi un siglo de educación pública a cargo del Estado, que está basada principalmente por una postura positivista de la realidad, que plantea verdades unívocas y justamente establece una relación vertical y unidireccional alumno-maestro. No me parece sorprendente en ese sentido que posturas educativas que apunten hacia otros lados y en un encuentro como este llegar a un acuerdo donde podamos tener una conclusión permanente, única, en donde esté representado todo, la opinión de todos, sea difícil. Me parece por el contrario que esa es una virtud del grupo, el siempre estar compartiendo diferentes opiniones y siempre estar cuestionando y retroalimentando en ese mismo momento, en ese mismo ejercicio, la opinión de los demás. Y creo que más rico que el haber llegado a lo que hubiera podido ser una conclusión bueno, todos ya opinamos esto, todos estamos de acuerdo, en lo individual cada uno se lleva una parte más, una retroalimentación más rica, con varias preguntas y varias reflexiones que quedan por hacer desde el trabajo de grupo que realizamos en esos días, como en la parte individual que cada uno en su cotidianidad va desarrollando.
Me gustaría saber cómo se organizó, si fueron convocados cada uno de ustedes, si se ofrecieron, si hubo una convocatoria escrita, cómo se organizó este grupo específico.
Bueno, a través de Lucía San Román, que es curadora de Estudio SITAC, y de Carin Kuoni, la directora de esta edición de SITAC, con Adriana Maurer, Moisés y el equipo de Alumnos47, que somos una fundación, nos invitaron a pensar juntos cómo estructurar estos días que estuvimos fuera discutiendo estos temas. Se hizo por invitación y por muchas preguntas a gente de alrededor y participantes que conocemos para conformar un grupo más o menos heterogéneo. Entonces fue por invitación y por de voz en voz que se conformó el grupo.
A mí me parece muy interesante la lista de las urgencias, pero no pude anotarla. Soy de la UAM Xochimilco y la verdad me gustaría ver si en algún correo, en algún Face, en alguna página, en algún sitio, o si nosotros les damos nuestro Face o nuestra página o nuestro correo, nos pueden mandar esa lista de urgencias. Me pareció de una riqueza increíble y son cosas que tenemos que estar pensando todos nosotros hoy en día, ¿no? Entonces, la diversidad me pareció muy interesante también, pero hay algo que las vincula, no sé todavía bien cómo, pero quisiera poderlas tener, no sé si luego les doy mi correo y me las mandan o algo así, ¿no? Pero felicidades por lo que están haciendo.